I still remember the exact moment they asked me to leave the party, not because of what they said, but because of what happened just a few seconds later. You see, when you reach my age, you learn something important about people. Sometimes the ones who treat you the worst are the ones who think you have no place left in their world. They assume you're quiet because you're weak. They assume you're polite because you have no power. And sometimes they're very wrong. My name is Margaret Whitaker. I'm 67 years old, and I've lived most of my life in the same part of Connecticut, about 40 minutes outside Hartford. The winters here are long, the summers are gentle, and people tend to know each other's names. It's the kind of town where everyone waves when they drive past your house. For more than 30 years, I lived in a white colonial home at the end of Maple Ridge Road with my husband Daniel. We raised our son there, watched him ride his first bicycle in the driveway, and planted apple trees in the backyard the year he turned 10. Daniel passed away 8 years ago. Heart failure. Quick, the doctors said. But nothing about losing someone you've loved for 42 years ever feels quick. After he was gone, the house became very quiet. Too quiet some days. But I stayed. That house carried too many memories to leave behind. Our son Michael lived about 20 miles away in a newer neighborhood with his wife Olivia. They had a beautiful modern home with large windows and a kitchen island big enough to host a small party. Michael worked in finance in Hartford, and Olivia ran a small marketing business from home. They were busy people. Young. Successful. Always moving from one event to the next. Still, I tried to stay close to them. Every Sunday afternoon, I would drive over with something I'd baked. Usually a pie or a casserole. Sometimes Olivia seemed grateful. Other times she barely looked up from her phone. But I told myself that was just the difference between generations. Young people live faster lives. At least that's what I believed. Then one December evening, everything began to change. It was early December, the kind of cold night where the air smells like snow is coming. I was sitting in my living room with a cup of chamomile tea when my phone rang. It was Michael. "Hey Mom," he said. "Olivia and I are throwing a Christmas party next Saturday. A few friends from work, some neighbors, you should come." I smiled immediately. "I'd love that," I told him. He hesitated for just a second before adding, "It'll be pretty big. Olivia's been planning it for weeks." "That sounds wonderful," I said. And I meant it. The holidays had always been important in our family. When Michael was a child, our house was always filled with lights, music, and the smell of cinnamon. I used to spend days baking cookies and decorating the tree. Those were some of my happiest memories. So the idea of attending their Christmas party felt like a small gift. For the next few days, I even looked forward to it. I bought a new burgundy sweater from a little boutique downtown. Nothing extravagant, just something warm and festive. I wrapped a bottle of wine with a gold ribbon to bring as a host's gift. By the time Saturday arrived, the whole town looked like something out of a holiday postcard. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, covering the streets and rooftops in a soft white layer. Christmas lights glowed in windows, and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke from fireplaces. I drove to Michael and Olivia's house just after 6 o'clock. Their neighborhood was already full of cars parked along the curb. When I stepped out of my car, I could hear music coming from inside the house, laughter too. The warm glow of light spilled out through the large front windows. For a moment I simply stood there on the walkway, holding the bottle of wine. It looked like a beautiful party, and I felt happy to be part of it. I rang the doorbell. A few seconds later the door opened. Olivia stood there wearing a sleek black dress and a bright red lipstick that matched the decorations behind her. The house looked incredible, garlands along the staircase, candles on the tables, a tall Christmas tree glittering in the corner of the living room. "Oh," she said. "Just that." "Oh." Not exactly the welcome I expected. "Hi, Olivia," I said gently, holding up the bottle of wine. "I brought this for the party." She glanced at the bottle, then back at me. Her smile was thin. "Thanks," she said. "You didn't have to." Behind her, people were talking loudly, glasses clinking together. For a moment, she didn't move aside to let me in. Then she stepped back just enough for me to walk through the doorway. The living room was crowded with guests. Most of them looked to be in their 30s or early 40s, Michael and Olivia's friends from work, I assumed. I recognized almost none of them. Michael spotted me from across the room. "Mom!" he said, walking over with a glass in his hand. You made it. He gave me a quick hug. I wouldn't miss it, I said. But as the evening went on, I started to notice something strange. Olivia seemed irritated. Not openly rude at first. Just small things. When someone asked who I was, she said casually, "That's Michael's mom," in a tone that sounded more like an explanation than a welcome. Later, when people gathered around the dining table for appetizers, there didn't seem to be a seat left for me. I ended up standing near the kitchen counter with my plate. I tried not to think too much about it. Parties get crowded. People forget things. But as the hours passed, the atmosphere around me grew colder. I overheard Olivia whispering something to one of her friends while glancing in my direction. They both laughed softly. At one point, I walked into the living room just as Olivia was saying something that made a few people smile awkwardly. She stopped the moment she noticed me. And that's when I realized something was wrong. Not just a little wrong. Something deeper. Something uncomfortable. And before the night was over, they would ask me to leave the party entirely. For the first 30 minutes, I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things. Sometimes when you walk into a room where everyone already knows each other, it can feel a little awkward at first. I've been to enough community dinners and church events to understand that. So I stayed near the kitchen island, sipping a small glass of sparkling water Michael handed me earlier, smiling politely whenever someone glanced in my direction. The house smelled wonderful. Olivia had clearly spent days preparing for this party. There were trays of appetizers across the counter, mini quiches, stuffed mushrooms, and a large charcuterie board arranged with meats, cheeses, and grapes. Christmas music played softly from hidden speakers in the ceiling. People laughed, talked about work, vacations, and stock markets. But slowly, a strange feeling began to settle in my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Just the quiet awareness that I didn't quite belong there. At one point, a woman with dark curly hair approached me while refilling her wine glass. "Hi," she said kindly. "I don't think we've met." I smiled. "I'm Margaret, Michael's mother." "Oh," she said. "Nice to meet you. I'm Rachel. I work with Olivia." We chatted for a minute or two about the snowstorm expected later that week. It was a normal conversation, pleasant even. But halfway through it, Olivia walked over. Her heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor. "Rachel," she said quickly, placing a hand on her friend's arm. "I need you to meet someone in the living room." Rachel looked slightly confused. "Oh, okay." She gave me a small apologetic smile before following Olivia away. The whole exchange lasted less than 10 seconds. But something about it felt deliberate. I watched them disappear into the crowd. A few minutes later, I noticed Michael standing near the fireplace talking with two men in suits. He looked relaxed, laughing at something one of them said. I thought about walking over to join him, but before I could move, Olivia appeared again. She was carrying a tray of drinks this time. When she reached the kitchen island, she set the tray down with a small sigh and looked around the room. Her eyes landed on me. For a brief second, her smile faded. Then she walked over. "Margaret," she said, lowering her voice slightly. "Yes, dear. I just wanted to check. How long are you planning to stay tonight?" The question caught me off guard. "I'm not sure," I said gently. "I thought I might stay for a little while." "Why?" She glanced around the room again, as if making sure no one was listening too closely. "It's just that this party is mostly for our business circle," she said. "Clients, colleagues, people from Michael's office." I nodded slowly. "I understand." Her tone softened, but not in a comforting way. "You know how these things are," she continued. "Professional image and all that." For a moment, I wasn't entirely sure what she meant. Then the meaning settled in. She thought I didn't fit in with her guests. I kept my expression calm. "I'll try not to be in anyone's way," I said. She smiled again, though it didn't reach her eyes. "That would be helpful." She picked up the tray of drinks and walked away. I stood there quietly for a few seconds. In my 67 years of life, I've learned that sometimes people reveal their true feelings not through loud arguments, but through small sentences spoken in soft voices. That was one of those moments. Still, I wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. After all, my son had invited me. So I moved toward the living room, hoping to find a place to sit. The dining table was already full. 8 chairs all occupied. A few people stood nearby holding plates. There was one empty seat at the far end, but before I could walk toward it, Olivia stepped beside the chair and placed her purse there. "Sorry," she said casually to the group. "Saving this for someone." I stopped walking. No one seemed to notice. I turned instead toward a small armchair near the window and sat down. From there I could see most of the room. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the conversations flowing easily between people who clearly belonged to the same world. And then slowly I began to notice the looks. Not from everyone, but from a few of Olivia's closest friends. The kind of quick glances people exchange when they think someone doesn't quite fit the picture. One woman leaned toward Olivia and whispered something. They both looked in my direction. Then they smiled. A tight, uncomfortable smile. The kind that isn't meant to include you. I took a slow breath and looked down at my hands. My wedding ring was still there, the gold slightly worn after decades of use. Daniel used to say that parties like this were never really about the food or the music. They're about people showing each other where they stand, he once told me. At the time I thought he was being cynical. Now I wasn't so sure. About an hour later, the music grew louder as more guests arrived. The room felt warmer, more crowded. And that's when Olivia walked into the center of the living room, raised her voice slightly, and said something that made the entire night take a very different turn. Something that would soon lead to the moment when they asked me to leave the party. For a while, the party continued exactly the way it had before. Music playing, people laughing, glasses clinking. If someone had walked into the house at that moment, they would have seen nothing unusual. Just a successful couple hosting a beautiful Christmas gathering in a large, elegant home. But sitting in that armchair near the window, I could feel the atmosphere around me shifting. Not dramatically, just little things. Olivia moved through the room like she owned every inch of it. She greeted guests at the door, laughed loudly at jokes, and introduced people to one another with confident energy. Michael stayed mostly near the fireplace, talking about investments and market trends with his coworkers. And I sat quietly watching. At some point, a young man I hadn't seen before approached the chair beside me. He looked to be in his early 30s, wearing a navy blazer and holding a glass of red wine. "Is this seat taken?" he asked politely. "Not at all," I said. He sat down with a small sigh. "Big crowd tonight," he said. "Yes," I replied. "It certainly is." He glanced around the room before asking, "How do you know Olivia and Michael?" I smiled faintly. "I'm Michael's mother." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Oh, I didn't realize. I'm Jason. I work with Olivia on a few marketing projects." We talked for a few minutes about Connecticut winters and the traffic near Hartford. It was an easy conversation, the kind you have with strangers at parties. But then something happened that reminded me once again that I wasn't really meant to be there. Across the room, Olivia noticed us talking. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. Within seconds she walked over. "Jason," she said brightly. "There you are. I've been looking for you." Jason turned in his chair. "Oh, what's up?" "I need you to meet someone from the real estate group," she said, already reaching for his arm. "They've been asking about your last campaign." Jason stood up immediately. "Oh sure." Before leaving he looked back at me. "Nice meeting you, Margaret." "You too," I said. But the moment he walked away with Olivia, I heard her say something under her breath. Not loudly, but loud enough for me to catch a few words. "Doesn't really belong here." The words hung in the air long after they disappeared into the crowd. For the first time that evening, a small knot formed in my stomach. Still I tried to stay calm. I reminded myself that this was Michael's home now. His life. His world. Maybe I simply didn't understand the way these gatherings worked. But then, about 10 minutes later, something happened that made the entire room grow quieter. Olivia stepped toward the center of the living room. She picked up a small glass and lightly tapped it with a spoon. The gentle ringing sound caught everyone's attention. "Can I get everyone's attention for a moment?" she said with a bright smile. Conversation slowly faded. People turned toward her. Michael walked over and stood beside her, placing one hand casually in his pocket. "I just wanted to say thank you all for coming tonight," Olivia began. "This year has been incredible for our business. and we couldn't have done it without the support of so many amazing people in this room. Several guests nodded, raising their glasses. It means a lot to us, she continued, to celebrate the holidays surrounded by people who have helped us grow. She paused, glancing around the room, and then her eyes landed on me. For just a moment, something in her expression changed. The smile remained on her lips, but her eyes grew colder. Of course, she added, her tone shifting slightly. This evening was meant to be a gathering for our colleagues and professional circle. A few guests exchanged curious looks. I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. Olivia took a small breath before continuing. So if anyone here feels like they might not quite fit that description, she said lightly, please don't feel obligated to stay. A quiet murmur moved through the room. Most people probably assumed she was joking, but I knew better. Her gaze was still fixed directly on me, and suddenly, every pair of eyes in the living room seemed to follow hers. Michael shifted uncomfortably beside her. Olivia, he said quietly, but she didn't stop. Instead, she walked a few steps closer to where I was sitting. Her heels clicked softly against the floor. The room had grown very quiet now. People weren't laughing anymore. They were watching. When Olivia reached the chair in front of me, she folded her arms and tilted her head slightly. Her voice was calm, but there was no warmth left in it. Margaret, she said. Yes, I replied, keeping my voice steady. She gestured toward the front door. Maybe it would be better if you headed home. For a moment, the entire house seemed to hold its breath. Someone near the kitchen whispered, Wait, is she serious? I slowly stood up from the chair. Not because I agreed with her, but because I didn't want to create a scene in my son's home. Michael looked stunned. Olivia, that's not. It's fine, I said gently, placing a hand on his arm. Then I looked at her. You're hosting the party, I said quietly. I wouldn't want to make anyone uncomfortable. A few people in the room shifted awkwardly. One woman lowered her glass and stared at the floor. Olivia gave a short nod, clearly satisfied. Thank you for understanding. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair. The house felt colder now than it had when I arrived. As I walked toward the front door, I could hear the faint sound of whispers behind me, and I remember thinking to myself, after everything this family had shared together, this was how the night was going to end. But what none of them knew, what none of them could possibly have expected, was that in less than 30 seconds the front door would open, and the most powerful woman in that entire room would walk inside. For a few seconds after Olivia told me to leave, the entire room stayed silent. Not the comfortable kind of silence. The heavy kind. The kind that makes people look down at their drinks or suddenly become very interested in the decorations on the wall. I slipped my coat over my shoulders slowly. My hands were steady, though I could feel dozens of eyes watching every movement. In my life I had been embarrassed before. Everyone has. But something about that moment felt different. Maybe it was the way Olivia stood there with her arms crossed, as if she had finally corrected a mistake. Or maybe it was the way Michael looked completely frozen beside her, unsure what to do. Either way, I knew one thing. Arguing wouldn't help. So I simply walked toward the front door. The music had stopped. Someone must have lowered the volume when the tension started. All I could hear now were quiet whispers spreading across the living room. Did she really just ask her to leave? That's Michael's mother, right? Wow. I kept my eyes on the floor as I reached the hallway. The coat rack stood beside the door, covered with winter jackets from the guests who had arrived earlier. Snow had started falling again outside, the soft white flakes drifting past the glass panels beside the entrance. I reached for my scarf. Behind me I heard Michael's voice. Mom, wait. I paused but didn't turn around right away. He walked down the hallway toward me, his footsteps quick and uneven. I'm really sorry about that, he said quietly. Olivia didn't mean. He stopped mid-sentence, clearly unsure how to finish it. I turned to face him. It's all right, Michael, I said gently. It's your home. I don't want to cause trouble. His face tightened with guilt. You're not causing trouble. From the living room, Olivia's voice floated down the hallway. Michael, everyone's waiting. He looked back toward the room, then at me again. For a moment I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who used to run into my arms after school, excited to tell me about his day. But that boy had grown up. And grown distant. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said quietly. I nodded. That would be nice. I wrapped my scarf around my neck and reached for the front door handle. And just as my hand touched the brass knob, the door opened from the other side. The sudden movement startled both of us. Cold winter air rushed into the hallway as the door swung inward. Standing there, framed by falling snow and the soft glow of the porch lights, was a tall woman in an elegant dark coat. She looked to be around my age, perhaps a few years younger. Her silver hair was styled neatly, and her posture carried a quiet confidence that immediately filled the space. Behind her, a black car idled in the driveway. For a moment none of us spoke. Then her eyes moved from me to Michael, and finally toward the crowded living room beyond the hallway. "Well," she said calmly, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. "It seems I've arrived right in the middle of something." Michael blinked in confusion. "Mrs. Davenport," he said. The name caught my attention immediately. Elaine Davenport. Anyone who had lived in this part of Connecticut long enough knew that name. She owned Davenport Holdings, one of the largest property management companies in the region. Over the years, she had purchased several historic buildings downtown and renovated entire neighborhoods. In many ways, she was one of the most influential business figures in the county. And apparently, she was standing in my son's hallway. Olivia rushed out of the living room the moment she heard the name. Her heels clicked rapidly against the floor as she approached. "Mrs. Davenport," she said, her voice suddenly bright and welcoming. "We didn't expect you tonight." Elaine removed her gloves slowly, her sharp eyes studying the three of us. "No," she replied. "I imagine you didn't." Her gaze shifted toward me again. "And yet," she added, "it appears I arrived just in time." Olivia forced a small laugh. "Oh, everything's perfectly fine. We were just—" She stopped when Elaine raised a single hand. The gesture was small, but it immediately silenced the room. Even from the hallway, I could feel the change in the air behind us. Guests in the living room had noticed who had arrived, and their conversations had stopped again. Elaine looked directly at me. "Margaret," she said. I blinked in surprise. "You know my name?" A faint smile touched her lips. "Of course I do." She stepped closer. "Which is why I'd like someone to explain to me," she continued calmly, "why the woman I personally invited to this party appears to be leaving." The hallway fell completely silent. Olivia's smile disappeared. "What?" she said softly. Elaine's eyes moved to her. "Yes," she said evenly. "What?" No one spoke. Michael looked from his wife to Mrs. Davenport, clearly trying to understand what was happening. But Elaine's attention remained fixed on Olivia. "You see," she continued, her voice calm but unmistakably firm, "when I suggested this gathering to help expand your professional network, I assumed my guest list would be respected." Olivia's face had gone pale. I didn't realize." Elaine tilted her head slightly. "You didn't realize that Margaret Whitaker was my guest?" The words echoed through the hallway. And suddenly every person in the living room behind us understood exactly what was happening. Because the woman Olivia had just asked to leave was the one person the most powerful woman in the room had come to see. For a moment nobody moved. Not Michael. Not Olivia. Not the guests standing quietly in the living room, pretending not to watch. The only sound in the hallway was the soft ticking of the wall clock above the coat rack. Olivia's voice finally broke the silence. I didn't know she was your guest," she said quickly, forcing a tight smile. "If I had known, of course things would have been different." Elaine Davenport looked at her for several seconds without speaking. It wasn't an angry look. It was worse than that. It was the calm expression of someone quietly measuring a situation. "Would they?" she asked. Olivia blinked. "I'm sorry." Elaine folded her gloves carefully and placed them in the pocket of her coat. "You said things would have been different," she continued calmly. "I'm curious what exactly that means." Olivia's smile faltered. "Well, I just meant, we didn't realize Margaret was connected to you." The hallway grew even quieter. Elaine's eyes moved slowly across the room, past Olivia, past Michael, and toward the guests standing behind them. Many of them suddenly looked very uncomfortable. Then she looked back at Olivia. "So if Margaret had arrived without any connection to me," Elaine asked gently, You would still have asked her to leave? Olivia opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Michael shifted his weight awkwardly. Mrs. Davenport, he said carefully, I think there's been a misunderstanding. My mom wasn't actually. Elaine raised a hand again. Michael stopped speaking instantly. I'm sure there has, she said. Her tone was still polite, but the room had grown so tense that even the smallest movement felt loud. Elaine turned toward me. Margaret, she said softly, were you leaving because you wanted to? I shook my head slowly. No, I said honestly, but I didn't want to cause problems in my son's home. A few guests exchanged glances when they heard that. Elaine nodded thoughtfully. Then she looked back at Olivia. That's interesting, she said. Olivia shifted uncomfortably. I really think this is being blown out of proportion, she said quickly. We were just trying to keep the event professional. Professional? Elaine repeated. Yes, Olivia said, sounding slightly more confident now. This is an important networking event. We have investors, partners, people from the board here tonight. Elaine glanced into the living room. Many of those important guests were now standing perfectly still, listening to every word. Then Elaine turned back. And Margaret doesn't belong in that environment? She asked. Olivia hesitated. Well, she's family. It's just different. I could see the exact moment Elaine understood everything. Her expression didn't change much, but something behind her eyes sharpened. Olivia, she said quietly, do you know why I suggested hosting this event here tonight? Olivia straightened slightly. Of course, she said. You mentioned wanting to introduce some of your colleagues to the new development project. Elaine nodded. That's correct. Then she added something that made the entire room go still. But the real reason, she continued, was because Margaret recommended you. Olivia froze. I'm sorry, what? Elaine looked at me with a small smile. Margaret and I have known each other for several years, she explained. We serve on the same local preservation board. Several guests murmured softly. Elaine continued. About 3 months ago, Margaret mentioned that her daughter-in-law was working hard to expand her consulting business. Olivia's face had gone completely pale now. She told me you were talented, Elaine said. Driven. Ambitious. Olivia looked slowly toward me. I said nothing. I trust Margaret's judgment, Elaine continued calmly. So I suggested we organize a small gathering. An opportunity for you to meet some people who might help your business grow. She gestured toward the living room. Many of the people standing in that room tonight came because I asked them to. A quiet wave of realization spread through the house. Guests who had arrived expecting a casual networking event were now beginning to understand something much bigger. Elaine turned her attention back to Olivia. So imagine my surprise, she said gently, when I walked through the door and found the woman who helped arrange this opportunity being asked to leave. Olivia looked like she might faint. I didn't know, she whispered. Michael ran a hand through his hair nervously. Mom, why didn't you tell us about this? I met his eyes calmly. You never asked, I said. The truth hung in the air between us. For months I had quietly supported their plans. Recommended Olivia to people who could help her career. Opened doors she didn't even realize existed. Not because I wanted credit, but because I wanted my son's family to succeed. Elaine turned toward the living room. Well, she said calmly, since everyone is already here, I suppose we should continue the evening. Then she looked directly at Olivia. But first, she added, I believe Margaret deserves an apology. No. One in the house moved. Olivia stood frozen in the middle of the hallway. Every guest watching her. Waiting. For the first time all evening she had no control over the room anymore. The silence in the hallway stretched longer than anyone expected. Every pair of eyes in the house was now fixed on Olivia. She stood perfectly still, her fingers tightening around the stem of the wine glass she was holding. For someone who had spent the entire evening confidently directing guests, greeting people, and controlling the atmosphere of the party, the sudden shift in power was impossible to ignore. And she knew it. Elaine Davenport waited patiently. She didn't rush the moment. She simply stood there beside me, calm and composed, giving Olivia exactly the space she needed to make a choice. Michael cleared his throat quietly. Olivia, he murmured. It was meant as a gentle reminder, but it only made the tension worse. Olivia finally set her glass down on the small table beside the wall. Then she turned toward me. Her smile returned, but it looked very different now. Much tighter. Much more forced. "Margaret," she said slowly, "I think there's been a misunderstanding tonight." I didn't answer. I simply looked at her. She continued, "I was just trying to make sure the event ran smoothly. I didn't realize you had helped organize everything." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Everyone in the room understood exactly what was happening. This wasn't an apology. It was damage control. Elaine noticed it too. "Olivia," she said gently, "that wasn't what I asked for." Olivia's smile flickered. "I know," she said quickly, "and I'm sorry if Margaret felt uncomfortable." Again, the words sounded polite, but they were carefully crafted. She wasn't apologizing for asking me to leave. She was apologizing for how I felt about it. Elaine tilted her head slightly. Then she looked at me. "Margaret," she asked softly, "do you feel that was an apology?" I couldn't help smiling a little. It wasn't a cruel smile, just a tired one. "No," I said honestly. A ripple of quiet murmurs passed through the living room. Olivia's cheeks flushed red. Michael stepped forward quickly. "Okay," he said, trying to lighten the situation. "I think we're all making this bigger than it needs to be. Let's just move on and enjoy the evening." But Elaine didn't move. Instead, she said something that changed the entire atmosphere of the house. "I think we should be very careful about moving on too quickly." Her voice was still calm, but now it carried a quiet authority that filled the room. Michael frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Elaine looked at him with a kind expression. "Michael," she said, "do you know who purchased this property originally?" He blinked. "What?" "This house," she repeated. Michael glanced around as if the question made no sense. "Well, we did," he said. 2 years ago." Elaine nodded slowly. "That's what you were told?" Michael's expression shifted. "Yes." Olivia's posture stiffened beside him. Elaine turned toward the living room and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I find real estate fascinating," she said casually, "especially when properties change ownership in interesting ways." Several guests leaned closer, sensing that something important was about to be revealed. Elaine continued, 3 years ago, this house was owned by a retired teacher who had lived here for more than 30 years. I felt Michael's eyes slowly move toward me. Elaine continued speaking. She sold the property to help her son and daughter-in-law start their lives together. Michael's voice was quiet now. "Mom." But Elaine wasn't finished. "The sale price," she added calmly, "was far below the market value at the time." A man near the kitchen whispered something to the woman beside him. Everyone was beginning to understand. Elaine looked at Olivia again. "And the most interesting part," she said, "was the way the paperwork was structured." Olivia's face had gone completely pale. Michael looked confused. "What paperwork?" Elaine's eyes moved back to me. "Margaret," she said gently, "would you like to explain it?" For a moment I said nothing. I hadn't planned to talk about this tonight. But the truth had a way of appearing when people needed to hear it. I looked at my son. His face held a mixture of confusion and something else. Something uncertain. "Michael," I said softly, "when you and Olivia wanted to buy this house, the bank said you didn't qualify for the full mortgage yet." He nodded slowly. "That's why you helped with the down payment." "Yes," I said. Then I added the part he had never asked about. But the house was never transferred completely. The hallway grew silent again. Michael stared at me. "I don't understand." I took a small breath. "The property title," I said quietly, "was placed in a shared trust when we completed the sale." Olivia whispered something under her breath. Elaine finished the explanation calmly. "In simple terms," she said, "Margaret still legally owns the house." No one in the room moved. Not Michael. Not Olivia. Not a single guest. Because suddenly the situation had changed completely. The house where Olivia had just asked me to leave was still mine. For several seconds the room was completely silent. You could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, and the distant sound of traffic outside the house. No one spoke. No one even shifted their weight. Michael looked at me as if he had just heard something impossible. Mom, what do you mean you still own the house? His voice wasn't angry. It was confused, and honestly a little frightened. Olivia's reaction was very different. Her shoulders stiffened, and her eyes moved quickly from me to Elaine and then back again. That's not true, she said quickly. Her voice was sharp. You sold the house to us. I didn't answer immediately. Instead I looked at my son. Michael, I said gently, do you remember the day we signed the papers at the title office? He nodded slowly. Of course I do. You remember the lawyer explaining that the bank wouldn't approve the full mortgage yet? Yes. And that I agreed to structure the sale differently so you and Olivia could still move in? He hesitated. Yeah. But that was just temporary. Olivia stepped forward quickly. Yes, she said, almost interrupting him. That was just paperwork until the refinance. Elaine folded her hands calmly in front of her. That refinance never happened, she said quietly. Several guests exchanged looks. Michael frowned. What do you mean? Elaine looked at him kindly. I mean the trust agreement was never dissolved. Michael turned to Olivia. You told me that was taken care of. Olivia's voice rose slightly. It was supposed to be. The calm confidence she had shown earlier in the evening was gone now. She looked nervous, angry, cornered. This is ridiculous, she said, gesturing toward me. Margaret is making this sound like she still owns the place. That's not what the agreement meant. Elaine didn't react emotionally. She simply reached into her purse. I don't usually carry legal documents to social events, she said calmly. But tonight seemed unusual. She pulled out a folded folder. Michael stared at it. What is that? The trust summary, Elaine replied. She handed it to him. Michael opened the folder slowly. The room stayed quiet while he read. I watched his expression carefully. First confusion, then concentration, then something heavier. His eyes moved across the page again. Wait, he whispered. He flipped to the second page. No, that can't be right. Olivia tried to grab the papers from him. Michael, you don't need to look at that right now. But he pulled them back slightly. Yes, I do. He read another paragraph. Then he looked up at me. Mom, this says the property stays in the trust until the loan is fully refinanced. Yes, I said. And the refinance deadline was 3 years. That's correct. Michael swallowed slowly. Which means, he didn't finish the sentence. But Elaine did. The deadline passed 6 months ago. A quiet gasp moved through the room. Michael looked down again. And the clause after that, he read it aloud. If refinancing is not completed by the deadline, ownership of the property remains with the original owner. He lowered the paper slowly. His eyes moved toward me. You. I nodded once. Olivia shook her head immediately. No, her voice was louder now. That's not how it works. Michael looked at her. It literally says that. She crossed her arms. This is some kind of technicality. Elaine spoke calmly. In real estate law, technicalities are usually called contracts. Some guests laughed softly under their breath. Olivia's face flushed. This is unbelievable, she said. But no one was looking at her anymore. They were looking at me. And for the first time that evening, Olivia realized something very important. The woman she had just asked to leave the house was still the legal owner. Michael sat down slowly on the edge of the couch. The papers were still in his hands. He read the same paragraph again, then again, as if the words might somehow change. Mom, why didn't you tell me this before? His voice sounded quieter now, almost hurt. I walked a few steps closer. Because I trusted you. That answer hung in the air. Michael looked down at the floor. Olivia didn't like where the conversation was going. This is being blown completely out of proportion, she said sharply. Margaret helped us buy the house. That's all. Elaine tilted her head slightly. That's not quite accurate. Olivia's patience was gone. Oh, and now you're the expert? I'm a lawyer, Elaine said calmly. A few guests chuckled again. Olivia looked around the room and realized something uncomfortable. The crowd that had been listening to her earlier was no longer on her side. Michael finally stood up again. He looked at Olivia. Did you know about this? She hesitated. Just for a second. But that second was enough. You knew, he said quietly. I knew it wasn't a big deal, she replied quickly. Michael shook his head. You told me the refinance was done. Well, the bank delayed things. So you lied to me? Her voice grew defensive. I didn't lie. I simplified. Michael laughed once. But it wasn't a happy laugh. Simplified. Elaine gently stepped aside so the two of them could face each other fully. I stayed silent. Sometimes people reveal more when you let them talk. Michael looked at the papers again. This means Mom still owns the house. Olivia crossed her arms again. Technically. Michael stared at her. You told her to leave tonight. She was embarrassing us. Michael's voice rose slightly. She was standing in her own living room. The words echoed through the house. And suddenly everyone understood what had just happened. Olivia had tried to remove the owner of the house from her own party. Olivia looked around the room again. The tension was crushing now. Fine, she said. If she still technically owns it, then let's fix the paperwork tomorrow. Elaine smiled politely. That might be difficult. Olivia glared at her. And why is that? Elaine's voice stayed soft. Because Margaret doesn't have to sell it anymore. Another wave of whispers moved through the guests. Michael slowly turned toward me again. Mom, you wouldn't do that to us. I looked at him carefully. For a long moment I didn't answer. Because the truth was, I hadn't decided yet. But tonight had changed many things. And everyone in that house could feel it. The party was no longer a party. The music had stopped. The drinks sat untouched on the counter. People were pretending to chat quietly, but every single one of them was listening. Michael walked toward me slowly. Mom, can we talk? Of course. We stepped into the dining room, just a few feet away from everyone else. Close enough that voices carried. Olivia stayed in the living room, watching. Michael lowered his voice. Why didn't you say something earlier tonight? I gave him a gentle look. Would you have believed me? He didn't answer. That silence was my answer. I didn't want a confrontation, I continued. I just wanted to enjoy the evening. Michael ran a hand through his hair. Olivia didn't mean it the way it sounded. I smiled softly. She told me to leave my own home. He sighed. I know. For the first time that night he looked embarrassed. I should have stepped in sooner. Yes, I said quietly. Back in the living room, Olivia was talking to two guests, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. But the energy had changed. People looked at her differently now. Michael followed my gaze. This got out of hand. It didn't have to. He nodded slowly. I'll talk to her. Before he could move, Elaine appeared beside us. Margaret, she said softly. Yes. There's one more detail you may want to mention tonight. Michael frowned. What detail? Elaine looked at him. The trust also contains a residency clause. Michael's confusion returned. What does that mean? Elaine answered calmly. If the original owner feels unwelcome or mistreated in the home, she has the legal right to reclaim full possession of the property. Michael's face went pale. Immediately. Yes. He looked at me. Mom, you wouldn't. I didn't answer. Not yet. Because sometimes the most powerful response is silence. The living room felt smaller now. Word had spread quickly through the guests about what Elaine had just revealed. Some people were whispering quietly. Others pretended not to stare. Olivia walked toward us again. Her expression was tight. Are we seriously still discussing this? Michael looked at her carefully. You told my mom to leave. I told her to step outside so the party wouldn't be awkward. You said she was making people uncomfortable. She was. Michael held up the documents. You knew this house was still technically hers. Olivia's jaw tightened. That's not the point. Michael stared at her. That is exactly the point. For the first time that evening, Olivia looked unsure. Elaine remained calm beside me. Michael turned back toward me. Mom, what do you want to do? The entire room fell silent again. Everyone waited. I looked around the house. The walls I had painted. The kitchenware. I had cooked thousands of meals. The backyard where Michael played as a child. Then I looked at my son. I want respect, I said quietly. Not anger. Not revenge. Just honesty. Michael nodded slowly. Then he turned to Olivia. You owe my mother an apology. Olivia looked at the floor. Then at the guests. Then finally at me. Her pride fought with her logic. Everyone could see it. Finally she spoke. I may have overreacted. It wasn't perfect. But it was the first real step. And everyone in the room knew it. The tension slowly began to soften. Guests relaxed slightly. Someone restarted the music quietly. Michael handed the documents back to Elaine. Thank you, he said. She nodded. I simply believe clarity is important. Olivia stood beside him silently. Finally she looked at me again. I didn't realize the situation tonight. Her voice was lower now. I should not have told you to leave. That was closer to the truth. I nodded. Thank you. Michael exhaled slowly. Mom, you're always welcome here. I smiled slightly. I know. Because technically it was still my house. Later that night, after the guests had left, the house was quiet again. Michael walked me to the front door. I'm sorry, he said. I know. Olivia stood behind him, still thoughtful, still processing everything that had happened. I looked at them both. I didn't come tonight to prove ownership, I said softly. I came because I'm your mother. Michael nodded. And for the first time that evening the tension was gone, because sometimes the strongest lesson in a family is simply reminding people who built the home in the first place.